The sinking of the Bismarck left viewers breathless with its epic war imagery. But the actors of the film survived and perished in tragedies that no one could have predicted. They lost their homeland, freedom, and the light of life. And finally, they met a crushing death. What actually happened? Let's remember them and honor their legacy. Esmond Knight as Captain John Leach. At the age of 54, Esmond Pennington Knight starred in the 1960 war film The Sink of the Bismarck as Captain John Leach, the commanding officer of HMS Prince of Wales. The role was so important because Knight himself was on board when it collided with the real battleship Bismarck nearly 20 years ago. Having the captain played by an actor with vivid memories of the battle for survival made his role more poignant and authentic than it could have been. Esmond Knight was born on 4 May 1906 in East Sheen, Surrey, England. However, his life was marked by tragedy. In 1941, during the Battle of Bismarck, shell fragments hit the area where he was stationed, leaving him completely blind for 2 years. He lost one eye permanently, and the other was severely damaged. Knight went from rising star to obscurity. The first 2 years after the accident were full of helplessness and despair. He could not see the faces of his loved ones. He could not walk, and his spirit was destroyed by despair. Although subsequent treatment restored some of his vision, the damage never went away. Knight learned to play half-blind, relying on his memory and the guidance of his teammates. But behind the spotlight lay sleepless nights, constant pain, and a soul scarred by psychological trauma. On February 23, 1987, Esmond Knight died in London of a heart attack at the age of 80. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $1.5 million, accumulated over half a century of work on stage and screen. He is remembered not only as a talented artist, but also as a symbol of resilience. Michael Goodliffe as Captain Bannister. At the age of 46, Michael Goodliffe played Captain Bannister in The Sinking of the Bismarck, 1960, a naval officer of the British High Command. With his intellectual presence, calm demeanor, and strong presence, Goodliffe was often cast in the roles of doctors, lawyers, or military officers, figures who embodied authority and self-confidence. But behind his unwavering gaze on the screen lay a life full of poignant memories and unresolved tragedies. Michael Goodliffe was born on October 1, 1914, in Bebington, Cheshire, England. His first major tragedy occurred in 1940 when he fought at Dunkirk. Wounded in the leg, he was captured by the Germans and spent 5 years as a prisoner of war. Life in the camp was a mixture of hunger, disease, and constant despair. To make matters worse, he was mistakenly pronounced dead at home, and the newspaper even published his obituary. During these dark times, he stuck to the prison scene, writing and acting to keep his spirits up. But when the war ended, he returned with deep psychological scars, carrying with him terrifying memories that will never fade. After the war, Goodliffe had a successful career, appearing in over 100 roles. However, past traumas and depression continued to haunt him. He turned to alcohol to calm his thoughts, but the bitter drink only plunged him deeper into despair. In 1976, during rehearsals for the play Equus, his health deteriorated completely, and he lost all hope of finding peace again. On March 20, 1976, on a gloomy afternoon at Atkinson Morley Hospital, Goodliffe threw himself down the stairs and tragically ended his own life. He was 61 years old. He left a wife, Dorothy Margaret Tyndale, 3 children, and an estate estimated at $800,000. His tragic death not only shocked the British acting community, but also made Goodliffe a symbol of the tragic fate of a talented generation forever haunted by the scourge of war. Karl Stapanek as Admiral Gunther Lütjens. At the age of 61, Karl Stapanek played Admiral Gunther Lütjens, the Nazi naval commander during a devastating naval battle in the 1960 film The Sinking of the Bismarck. His cold, stoic appearance and commanding voice imbued the character with terrifying authority. It wasn't just an on-screen villain role. It also reflected his own struggles and internal conflicts. Karl Stapanek was born on October 29, 1899, in Brno, then part of Austria-Hungary. Instead of a peaceful childhood, he grew up in the chaos of Europe, torn by wars and divisions. As a child, he lived in constant uncertainty, witnessing the decay of society around him, his family's struggle with poverty, and facing endless fears about an uncertain future. This harsh reality left him uprooted and insecure. The pain of loss in childhood left a lasting mark, so even in adulthood, whether on stage or in front of the cameras, there was always a deep sadness in his eyes that no role could hide. On Christmas Day, December 25, 1980, Karl Stapanek died of a heart attack in London at the age of 81. His death on such a peaceful day only added to the sadness, a bitter irony for a man who had already experienced so much tragedy in his life. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $1 million, largely due to his more than 100 roles in international films. His life ended in solitude, leaving behind the image of an exiled artist haunted for years by the loss of his homeland, quietly drifting away, never regaining the peace lost in his childhood. Dana Winter as Second Officer Ann Davis. At the age of 29, Dana Winter played Second Officer Ann Davis in the 1960 film The Sinking of the Bismarck. With her elegant beauty, penetrating gaze, and calm demeanor, she was not only the only female character in the film, but also a symbol of courage before the war. This role helped Dana Winter win the hearts of international audiences and established her as one of the most distinctive actresses of the 1960s. Dana Winter was born in Berlin on June 8, 1931. However, her personal life was full of difficulties, especially in her marriage. In 1956, Winter married Hollywood lawyer Greg Bautzer and seemed to have found stability. But the lure of Hollywood soon turned into a bitter struggle within the walls of their palatial mansion. A son was born to them, but the marriage quickly fell apart due to irreconcilable differences. Her last years were marked by property disputes, custody battles, and bitter words that exhausted Dana. In 1981, the marriage ended in divorce, leaving Dan with emotional wounds in Hollywood that never healed. Behind the star's proud smile were hidden silent tears, the likes of which the public had never seen before. Dana Winter died on May 5, 2011, in Ojai, California, at the age of 79 after a long battle with congestive heart failure. Her net worth was estimated at $3 million at the time, the result of a career spanning more than 4 decades, starring in classics like The Body Snatchers. The last touching photo shows him dying peacefully. Her son said it was like she just got off the bus. It was a simple but tragic end for a once brilliant woman remembered as proud and fragile, whose life oscillated between fame and loneliness. Michael Horden jako Almirante Jack Tovey. Michael Murray Horden was 49 years old when he played Admiral Jack Tovey in The Bismarck Sinks, 1960. His stern demeanor, commanding voice, and experienced face transformed him into a brave admiral during a fierce naval battle. This role was one of his most significant, highlighting both his artistic maturity and his personal contribution to the historical work. Michael Horden was born on October 3, 1911, in Berkhamsted, Hertfordshire, England. But behind his distinguished career on stage and in film was a life of loss. He had only one wife, Grace Evelyn Mortimer, to whom he was married for over 4 decades. She was his safe haven, the only real escape from his busy and stressful life. But tragedy struck in 1986 when Grace died after a long illness, leaving him alone in an empty house. After this agonizing loss, Horden lived in silence and plunged into deep loneliness. Despite his dedication to his work, he couldn't forget the void she left behind. Her death seemed to drain every ounce of his spirit, making his final years difficult and bleak. On May 2, 1995, Michael Horden died in Oxford, England, aged 83, after years of battling chronic kidney disease. His net worth was estimated at $4 million at the time of his death, earned through more than 140 film and television roles, as well as numerous theater and radio productions. His most memorable images are his deep, sonorous voice in Paddington Bear and his moving portrayal of Jacob Marley in Scrooge, 1951. A reminder that even after his death, Michael Horden's voice and artistic legacy will live on in the hearts of many generations. Maurice Denham as Commander Richards. At the age of 51, Maurice Denham starred in Sink the Bismarck, 1960, as Commander Richards, a dedicated and determined naval officer in search of a German battleship. His performance was calm yet expressive, reflecting the seriousness and depth he brought to each character. This happened at the height of Denham's career, when he was already a familiar face in British film, theater, and radio. Maurice Denham was born on 23rd of December 1909 in Beckenham, Kent, England. After leaving the show, however, he carried with him a sadness that no amount of professional success could erase. A family tragedy. In 1936, he married Margaret Dunn and had 3 children, building seemingly lasting happiness. However, tragedy struck when his daughter Virginia died in an accident, leaving a wound in Denham's heart that never healed. He confided to his friends that the loss was a crushing blow that made all the laughter on the stage and the applause in the theater seem distant and empty. He set to work, carefully writing notes on each reel as if to fill in the blank. But the more he worked, the more he realized the loneliness and emptiness of his hometown. The loss of his son cast a silent shadow over the rest of his life, a shadow that the public never really saw. On 24 July 2002, Maurice Denham died of natural causes at Denville Hall, London, aged 92. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $1.8 million, the result of nearly 7 decades of tireless dedication to theater, film, and radio. It remains the most vivid image of a dedicated artist whose voice and face have become familiar to generations of listeners. But deep down, he's also a grieving father whose life, lost forever, was both glorious and tragic. Jack Guillim as Rear Admiral Wilfred Patterson. Jack William Frederick Guillim made his film debut in The Sinking of the Bismarck, 1960, where he played Rear Admiral Wilfred Patterson, a man who personified the discipline and power of the British Royal Navy at the age of 51. With his tall stature, robust build, and imposing looks, he convinced the audience that he was a real officer and not just a role. During this period, Guillim became a familiar figure in war films and epics. Jack Guillim was born on December 15, 1909, in London, England. However, his personal life was difficult and full of sorrow, especially in his marriage. In 1943, he married Peggy Ballard, who supported him during the difficult war years and bore him 2 children. However, their happiness was disrupted in 1958 by Peggy's death, and the Guills were left with the burden of raising the family. The sudden loss devastated Guillim, who had to assume the role of both father and mother, maintaining a strong stance in front of his children, but bearing his grief in silence. Although he later remarried to Olivia Selby and had another child, the wound of his first wife's death never healed and cast a shadow over his most famous years on stage and screen. Jack Guillim died on July 2, 2001 in Los Angeles, USA at the age of 91 after years of battling health problems. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $1.5 million, thanks in large part to a decades-long acting career that included such masterpieces as Lawrence of Arabia, Patton, and Clash of the Titans. The image of an actor with a strong presence, but at heart a man who spent his life haunted by the memory of his late wife. A tragedy that made his journey both heroic and painful became etched in the public consciousness. Lawrence Naismith as the first Sea Lord. At the age of 52, Lawrence Naismith starred in the film Sinking the Bismarck, 1960, as the First Lord of the Admiralty, commander of the British Royal Navy. With his stern face, impressive demeanor, and military experience, he brought the character to life, convincing the audience of the commander's strength and determination. The role also marked a maturing period in his career, when the name Naismith became synonymous with strong and unyielding characters. Lawrence Naismith was born on 14 December 1908 in Thames Ditton, Surrey, England. But at the center of his work was a story of loss and marriage. Naismith married Christine Baca in 1939, and their love seemed to be inseparable, despite the war and the ups and downs of his career. She was not only his lifelong companion, but also a strong support system that helped him overcome the loneliness of acting and the challenging roles he faced. However, in 1985, Christine died after a serious illness, leaving him with an indescribable sadness. Her death broke the last barrier protecting his heart. He lived the last years of his life in seclusion from England, where every street reminded him of her. He went to Australia with his son. It was not a peaceful journey, but an escape from the pain that haunted him until the end. On June 5, 1992, Lawrence Naismith died in Southport, Queensland, Australia, aged 83, after years of ill health due to heart problems. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $2 million, mainly due to his roles in films such as Diamonds Are Forever and A Night to Remember. The actor's most moving portrait is that of someone who has transformed into some of the most powerful characters on screen, dying quietly in a foreign land and carrying with him the endless pain of his wife's death, a life both glorious and tragic. Geoffrey Keane as Deputy Chief of the Naval Staff. At the age of 44, Geoffrey Ian Keane starred in the 1960 film Sinking the Bismarck as Deputy Chief of the Naval Staff, a key figure in the Royal Navy's command. With his stern face and cool, precise acting style, Keane perfectly portrayed a man who took on enormous responsibility in moments that could mean the difference between life and death. This role not only showcased his talent, but also paved the way for him to become a famous face in several cult films, the most famous of which is the James Bond series. Geoffrey Keane was born on August 21, 1916 in Wallingford, Oxfordshire, England. However, his personal life was marked by emotional turmoil that did not bring him lasting peace. They lived together for almost 3 decades, but fate took a cruel turn. In 1989, Doris died, leaving Keane to face old age alone. He focused on a man who had seen his luck slip through his fingers more than once, leaving a void that could never be filled. Geoffrey Keane died on the 3rd November 2005 at Denville Hall, London, aged 89. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $3.5 million, derived from more than 100 films, including 6 roles as Sir Frederick Grey, the Secretary of Defense, in the James Bond series. In the public eye, he is an actor associated with powerful roles. But behind the scenes, he was a private man, suffering from the pain of broken marriages and loneliness that haunted him for the rest of his life. Mark Dignam as Captain Loban Mond. At 51, Cuthbert Mark Dignam played Captain Loban Mond, a stern and determined naval officer in Sinking the Bismarck, 1960. With his stern demeanor and deep voice, he convinced the audience that they were watching a real man, fresh from the battlefield. The film was not only a turning point in Dignam's career, but also cemented his place among a generation of actors often associated with strong and responsible characters. Mark Dignam was born on March 20th, 1909 in London, England. However, despite his brilliant career, his marriage was full of disappointment and suffering. He had 3 marriages, first to Georgia McKinnon and then to Helen Christie, which ended in divorce. Both failed marriages left him with deep emotional wounds, burdening him with insecurity and a lingering feeling that family happiness was too fragile to last. It was only with his 3rd wife, Virginia Kirby, that Dignam found solace. But the ghosts of the past continued to haunt him. After each round of applause, he retired to his room, carrying with him the loneliness of a man who had seen love fade so many times. On September 29, 1989, Mark Dignam died in London, England, aged 80, of heart failure. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $1.2 million, largely due to his stellar stage career and memorable film roles. However, what remains in the memory is not only the loss of a talented artist, but also the image of a person who lived a life full of public glory, while his heart carried private wounds and silent sorrow. Jack Watling as Director of Communications. At the age of 37, Jack Stanley Watling starred in Sinking the Bismarck, 1960, as a liaison officer who played a key role in relaying orders during the most tense moments of the battle. Although he was only a cog in the vast machine of the Navy, his character emphasized the importance of every man in a life-and-death situation. And Watling captured this meaning perfectly with his authentic and disciplined performance. Jack Watling was born on January 13, 1923, in Chingford, Essex, England. His marriage appeared to be a happy one, though not without problems. He married Patricia Hicks in 1947, and together they raised 5 children. Among them was Deborah Watling, best known for her role in Doctor Who. However, the success of her children meant that the family was constantly under the spotlight. At times, her career stalled, and financial pressures combined with the responsibilities of raising a large family left Watling mentally and physically exhausted. His last years became even more tragic when he was diagnosed with cancer, which forced him to suffer in silence. He tried to remain composed in front of his family, but deep inside he felt a pain that only he could bear. Jack Watling died on May 22, 2001, in Chelmsford, Essex, England, aged 78, after a long battle with cancer. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $1.5 million, amassed during a career spanning more than 6 decades on stage, film, and television. We remember him primarily for his dedication as an actor, but also as a person who quietly bore the burden of family and illness and died quietly. His passing left fans with deep sadness and grief. Behind the legend of the sinking of the Bismarck lie stories of artists consumed by fate and tragedy. They are gone, but their legacy and pain will live on forever. Which story bothers you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to discover more tragic stories hidden behind the scenes.